gather on this summer day. I want to say something about the first reading and the experience of Abraham with God. Some reflections on the gospel and the challenges of prayer. And finally conclude with a December memory. The first reading. What's happening? Abraham and God are clearly involved in conversation. And what do we call conversation with God? Prayer. It's a prayer. It's a conversation between Abraham and God. You know, and it's really quite extraordinary in many ways. Because I think if you're like most of us, we want to know what happens if there's only 9. Why did Abraham stop at 10? Of course, it really is the wrong question. What's extraordinary about the first reading is the intimacy that Abraham shares with God. And so this is who Abraham is, and this is how Abraham acts. And so and it's truly who Abraham is. And he's able to be himself before God. And God accepts who Abraham is and works and assures Abraham. What an extraordinary thing that is, that Abraham, who has really been named Abraham from Abram by God, is now transparent before God. It's not like God can't see or God didn't know to begin with, but there's great transparency and intimacy, which allows Abraham to speak his heart, to speak his mind, to speak his concerns. And God responds. Hopefully in our prayer, that's our experience, that we too are transparent. It is fine and good to have rote prayers, but they're not the fullness of the prayer experience. We're invited to a conversation about our lives and about our world and about God's involvement in it. The fullness of that spiritual conversation in prayer. The gospel reading. Of course, here in Luke's gospel, the Our Father is different than in Matthew's, and Luke's is, I think, much preferable in so many ways. But it begins with Our Father. Well, as you probably know, the word is Abba. I had friends who were just recently in Israel, and they said what struck them most is all through the streets of Jerusalem, little kids grabbing their father and saying, Abba, Abba, Abba. It's still a word that's used. It's the Hebrew and Semitic word, and it's not for father. It's for daddy. It's much more intimate than that. It's not something formal. The little kid, Abba, Abba, Abba. Give me something to eat. Give me something to drink. Abba. That's how we're to recognize our encounter with God. That whether God is father or mother, we're invited in this intimacy to be with God. That directly. That childlike, that trusting, that hope, that certainty is to be ours. That bread will be given, sins will be taken away, and we'll be empowered to do the same. The story that comes next is really quite problematic. So you have the story of the man coming to the neighbor to get bread. Well, it's a big deal back then. You know, it wasn't like we have our modern kitchens with granite counters and refrigerators and freezers and lots of bread there available whenever you want. And the challenging culture was one of hospitality. And so it says, and it really is incorrect, it says, if he doesn't get up to help him because of his friendship, he'll do it because of his persistence. And then that gets understood as, if we bug God enough, God will give us what we want. It's a complete mistranslation of the Greek. So from Elizabeth Johnson on down through the 30 scholars I looked at, they all said it's absolutely wrong. So why is the translation changed? I leave that to you. It should not say his persistence. Because when it says his persistence, the story's about the guy who's knocking. It should say his shamelessness. Now it's about the host who gets up because he's embarrassed, because he is shamed at his callousness, at his unwillingness to practice the hospitality, the hallmark of the culture. It completely changes the story when the Greek is corrected. It's not about the persistence of the guy. It's about that happens and that evokes from his friend this sense of shame. How selfish can I be that I won't get up to help someone? A very different sense of what that parable might be about. And so then we're invited to recognize that we do good things for our children. So how much more will God do for us in that intimate, loving relationship? That it's not about beating God down. It's about being transparent and intimate before God. It, of course, begs the question, what happens with unanswered prayers? I've said many times and continue to say it and try and live it. I think, first of all, we have to stop blaming God for weather and biology. So if we take those off the table, and yes, they need to be taken off the table because I fundamentally don't think they're on God's plate. So if you take weather and biology out of the picture, everything else that we pray for, why doesn't it happen? So we pray that people who are starving are fed, and they're not. We pray that justice reigns, and yet racism exists. It doesn't seem to be answered. And we pray that for people who are thirsty, they would be given water, and they're not. And we pray for all kinds of things, and it doesn't seem to happen. My best take on it is that I really believe God, in all cases, for all people, and all circumstances, is the ultimate respecter of freedom. So why are people hungry? Because people choose not to feed them. Whether they're corporations or individuals, and it's about selfishness and greed. Why does racism reign? Because people refuse to accept the equality and freedom of the other. Why are people thirsty? You can keep going. Every one of those things, I really believe, once the biology and weather stuff is off the plate, comes down to freedom of someone. And God won't violate that freedom, even if it's sinful, even if it's the wrong choice. Each of us in our own time have to come to dwell in appropriate, authentic freedom. And God won't violate it. And so then it frequently looks like the unanswered prayer. Because it's stepping on a sense of freedom. I said I would end with the December memory. I preach regularly in a parish, and so I say this every time there, and you may not have gotten this in December, so you'll get that and how it follows up. I always say to folks up there, very close to Christmas, to take your new calendar for the new year. Not that we have calendars anymore because they're all in our iPhones. And not that we have pens anymore either, but you do all that kind of stuff. And you write on July 25th, remember Christmas. And I got a couple emails from folks in the parish telling me, I remembered. And I always make two predictions and a question. And every year the predictions have been correct. A, that it's going to be hot, and B, that the Orioles will be in last place. I don't know, maybe I should try and make another one since I've had such good luck with those two. Why remember Christmas, and how does it relate to our readings today? It's the ultimate gift of intimacy, where God becomes one with the human person. And knows our hearts, and knows our sin, and knows our brokenness, even better than God knew Abraham. Even better. And so the conversation is for us this day, to truly recognize the gift of Christmas and the birth of God in our world, that we can be invited again and again in transparency and hope and trust into profound spiritual conversation. Don't let today pass without entering in once again.